What if the version of you that panics every morning isn't actually you? What if it's just the first voice that happened to speak before you woke up enough to answer back? 3 a.m. Your eyes open before the alarm. Nothing has happened, nothing is wrong, and yet your chest already knows something is wrong. This is how fear works. It does not wait for a reason. It arrives first, uninvited, and by the time you're fully awake, it has already taken the seat at the head of the table in your mind.
Most people lose this exact moment without ever noticing it existed. Fear speaks. They listen. The day is decided before their feet touch the floor. But there is a narrow window, a few seconds wide, where that seat is still empty. The Stoics, who buried friends, survived exile, and faced death sentences with open eyes, found something most people never learn in a lifetime. Fear loses most of its power the instant you speak before it does. 5 words for that window, used in order because each one disarms a fear sitting one layer deeper than the one before it. Say them once, nothing changes. Say them every morning until they're faster than the fear itself. Stay to the end. The 5th one is the fear most people spend their whole life avoiding and never say out loud. Like this if you're already feeling it, and tell me in the comments what time your fear usually shows up. Let's start with the smallest one. Number 1. Not yet. The first fear is the loudest and cheapest. It lives in the next 5 minutes, the unopened message, the test results still pending. It shows up before a hard conversation that hasn't even started, your mind already drafting the worst possible reply before the other person has said a single word. It is rarely about something happening. It is almost always about something that hasn't happened and may never happen at all. Seneca told his friend Lucilius the truth about this kind of fear directly. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The body cannot tell the difference between an imagined threat and a real one. It braces the same way for both, 40 rehearsals deep, exhausted by a disaster that hasn't even been confirmed. Not yet costs nothing to say. It doesn't deny the danger. It refuses to pay a bill that hasn't arrived. Notice what fear actually does in those 5 minutes. It doesn't gather more information. It doesn't make you more prepared for whatever's coming. It just makes you suffer twice, once now, in advance, and again later if the bad thing actually happens. Not yet is you refusing the first payment. If the news is bad, you'll deal with it then, with whatever you actually have at that moment, not with the imaginary, depleted version of you that spent the morning rehearsing it. This is the easy fear, though, loud, but not the one actually running your life underneath the surface. The one running your life is older. It doesn't live 5 minutes from now. It lives in everything you already survived and quietly decided you couldn't survive again. Number 2. I have already lived through this kind of dark. This fear is heavier because it doesn't ask if something bad might happen. It tells you that if it does, you won't make it, and it erases your own history the moment it speaks, conveniently forgetting every version of you that already stood exactly here. Epictetus, born into slavery, didn't build a philosophy on the absence of suffering. He built it on proof, his own proof, that suffering had already been outlived. He taught that we are wounded by our judgment about events, not the events themselves, and judgment can be retrained the same way a muscle can. You have a record. The year you thought would break you and didn't. The morning you couldn't imagine standing in and stood in anyway. The relationship that ended in a way you swore you wouldn't recover from, and somewhere, without marking the exact date, you did. Fear is betting you've forgotten that record. I have already lived through this kind of dark is you reading the file back out loud before fear finishes its sentence. This isn't the hollow comfort of everything happens for a reason. It's colder than that and far more useful. It's an inventory. You aren't required to feel grateful for the dark. You're only required to remember accurately that you've already walked out the other side of it. But proof of survival isn't the same as movement. Knowing you lived through the storm doesn't mean you'll walk towards the next one. That's the fear underneath this one, the kind that keeps you frozen even after the danger has already passed.
Number 3. I move before the fear leaves. Here's what almost everyone gets backward. They wait for fear to go quiet before acting, certain that bravery means feeling calm first. It rarely works that way, and waiting for it to work that way is how entire years disappear without anyone noticing. Seneca, writing while facing his own execution, never described fear vanishing before his final acts. He described moving through his days with it intact, fear and discipline occupying the same body at the same hour. Courage, in his hands, was never the absence of fear. It was simply refusing to let fear cast the only vote in the room. Hands shake before the honest conversation, the stomach tightens before the application is sent, the voice wavers before the boundary finally gets spoken out loud to the one person who has never once heard you say no. I move before the fear leaves stops you from waiting for permission that was never coming. You walk while it's still loud, because you finally stopped believing it intends to leave first. None of this is recklessness. It isn't pretending the risk doesn't exist. It's doing the preparation that's actually yours to do, and then moving on schedule, fear seated in the passenger seat instead of holding the wheel. There's a version of this that looks small from the outside and feels enormous from the inside. Sending the text you've drafted and deleted 4 times, walking into the appointment you've rescheduled twice already, standing up in the meeting and saying the thing everyone else is also thinking but no one has said yet. None of these require fear to be gone first. They only require you to move while it's still in the room. But here is where most people stop, satisfied with having acted once, afraid, never noticing the deeper fear still waiting underneath even this one, quieter, almost never said out loud. Number 4. This too is moving through me. Fear's oldest trick at this depth is convincing you a feeling has become a permanent address, that the dread you feel today is now who you are instead of something passing through who you are. This is no longer about a single event, it's about identity, and identity is far harder to dislodge than a moment. Marcus Aurelius returned to this constantly, reminding himself that all things are in flux, that the very fear gripping his chest today would be replaced by some other weather entirely, the way every season of his life had already been replaced by the next one. Not to dismiss the pain, to correctly size it against a sky that, underneath the storm, remains unchanged. This too is moving through me, places the fear where it belongs, as weather, not architecture. You don't fight the wave, you don't become the wave, you simply notice it has never once in your entire life kept the same shape for long. The version of you who couldn't imagine getting out of bed 18 months ago isn't the version of you reading this now. The version afraid today won't be the only version either. This is harder to believe in the middle of the storm than it is to write down on a page. That's expected. You aren't being asked to feel convinced. You're being asked to remember it anyway, the same way you'd remember a phone number you don't currently need, but will the next time the weather turns. And underneath all 4 of these is the one fear this whole window of words has quietly been built around.
Number 5. I would still choose this, even afraid. This is the fear no one escapes, that the things you love most, the people, the time, the body you're sitting in right now, will not last. Viktor Frankl watched this fear at its most extreme, inside conditions built to strip every certainty from a human life. What he found waiting underneath it had already been mapped by the Stoics centuries earlier. Meaning never required the absence of fear, or even the absence of loss. It required choosing anyway, in spite of both. Here's the part most people flinch from saying. This fifth fear doesn't get smaller the longer you live. If anything, it gets louder, because the longer you live, the more you actually have to lose. There is no version of this practice where the fear of losing what you love eventually goes quiet on its own. I would still choose this, even afraid, is the answer anyway. Picture choosing to love someone fully, knowing love arrives with no guarantee against loss. Picture starting work you actually care about, knowing it might fail in front of people who will remember. Picture staying present through someone's last year, the ending already written, showing up because the time itself is the point, not the outcome. This is the sentence that finally stops asking fear for permission in any form, at any depth. 5 words, 5 layers, 1 seat at the table that fear no longer fills uncontested. Not yet. I have already lived through this kind of dark. I move before the fear leaves. This too is moving through me. I would still choose this, even afraid. They will not remove fear from your life. No honest philosophy ever promised that. And the Stoics, who buried their own children and faced their own executions, would have laughed at anyone who claimed otherwise. What changes is simpler and harder. You speak first. You take the seat before fear takes it for you. Not because you've stopped being afraid, but because you've stopped waiting to feel ready before you act. Tomorrow, before your feet touch the floor, you'll have a few seconds where that seat is still empty. Tell me in the comments which of these 5 you're taking into that window first, and which fear specifically you're taking it into. Subscribe if you want to build this practice together, one morning at a time. Share this with someone's fear has been speaking first for far too long. The seat is still empty right now. Take it.